I still remember that morning with painful clarity inside a small courtroom in Houston where the steady hum of the air conditioner above us felt colder than the eyes of the people waiting for me to fall apart. I sat beside my attorney, both hands neatly resting on a thick case file. Across from me was the husband I had once believed I would grow old with. Adrian Whitmore wore a dark navy suit, an expensive watch peeking from his cuff, and a smile that belonged to a man convinced he had just won the final battle. He was about to take the 5-bedroom house, the 2 cars, the real estate company, the entire investment account, and everything we had once called marital property. I would walk away with one suitcase of old clothes, a few photographs of my son, and custody of Noah. My attorney, Elaine Porter, had looked at me for a long time before the hearing. She said quietly, "Meredith, you do not have to sign it this way. You have the right to fight for more." But I only shook my head. I had not come there to claim things that had already rotted from the inside. If you have ever been underestimated so badly that someone was certain you would never dare to fight back, comment 1. And if you want to hear more emotional stories of tables turning like this, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next part. In the row behind us, Lorraine Whitmore, my mother-in-law, sat with her back perfectly straight, like a queen watching a servant being banished from the palace. She said nothing, but the thin smile on her lips was enough to remind me of 8 years of being looked down on as if I were less than human. Beside her sat Sienna Lane, a woman nearly a decade younger than me, with softly curled blonde hair, a tight red dress, and a phone in her hand, as if she were recording a victory worth showing off. She even tilted her face to take a selfie when the court clerk called our divorce case. I heard Adrian's pen touch the paper. His signature was firm, quick, and arrogant. He did not read it. He had never read the things he believed he already controlled. He only glanced at the final page, signed his name, and pushed the file back toward the clerk with an almost cruel satisfaction. In that moment, I remembered the man who had once told me I did not understand money, did not understand business, and did not understand how the world worked. I did not cry. I did not tremble. I did not beg. I simply looked at him and smiled. 47 seconds later, Adrian's attorney turned to the page. He should have made his client read from the beginning. His face shifted from calm to deathly pale. Adrian's smile slowly disappeared like a lamp being unplugged in the middle of the night. And that was when he realized that what he had just signed was not his victory. It was the entire pile of ashes of his own life. 3 years before that morning in court, if someone had only looked at my life from the outside, they would have thought I was a lucky woman. I lived in a colonial-style house in the suburbs of Houston with a white fence, a neatly trimmed lawn, a living room that always smelled of vanilla candles, and a dining table long enough to host the guests Adrian called important people. Every weekend, we held small dinner parties. Adrian stood at the head of the table talking about real estate deals while I moved around the room refilling wine-changing salad plates and smiling at exactly the right moments, as if that too were part of the marriage contract. I used to think my silence was peace. I used to believe a good wife was someone who knew how to make her husband feel important in front of others. Adrian liked that. He liked it when his friends called him a self-made man. He liked it when his mother looked at me and said Meredith is lucky to have this life. No one asked who remembered every guest's food allergies, who stayed up late cleaning after each party, or who took Noah to school the next morning, while Adrian was still asleep from drinking too much expensive wine. The house had 5 bedrooms, but on many nights I felt as if there was not a single corner that truly belonged to me. Adrian's office was always locked. The garage held his polished sports car while I drove an old sedan with a scratch on the rear door from years before. The bank accounts, credit cards, property documents, everything was in Adrian's hands. He said it was because he was better with money. He said I only needed to take care of the family while he handled the big things. It sounded kind on the surface, but real kindness never makes another person feel smaller. Slowly, I became a shadow moving through my own house. I knew which towels belonged in the guest bathroom, which coffee my mother-in-law preferred, and when Adrian needed to be praised in front of investors. But I could no longer remember the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted. Every time I tried to talk about work, about wanting to return to accounting, Adrian would smile lightly as if I had said something childish. "You do not need to struggle," he said. "I make enough money." Back then, I did not yet understand that those words were not protection. They were the first lock fastened around my life. Before I became the quiet woman standing behind Adrian's dinner parties, I had once been a senior accountant at a mid-sized company in downtown Houston. I liked balance sheets. I liked the feeling that no matter how tangled things became, they could still be traced through records, invoices, and honest numbers. At the office, I was not someone's wife, not someone's daughter-in-law, not the woman standing behind another man's smile. I was Meredith Cole, the person my colleagues came to when the books had a problem, and no one could understand why. But after I became pregnant with Noah, Adrian began speaking about family in a very gentle voice. He placed his hand on my stomach and looked at me as if he were offering me a privilege. "Our child needs his mother at home," he said. "I do not want our child growing up with a nanny. Quit your job. I can take care of everything." I believed that was love. I believed that a man who wanted his wife to struggle less must surely love her deeply. I did not see the rest of that sentence, the part he never said out loud. If he took care of everything, he would also control everything. The day I handed in my resignation, my former boss looked at me for a long time. She asked if I was sure. I smiled and said it was only a short pause. I would return when my child was older. But life does not always slam a door in your face. Sometimes it closes 1 inch at a time, slowly enough for you to believe there is still a way out. After Noah was born, the household finances became more and more unfamiliar to me. Adrian moved the statements to his private email. The bank account passwords were changed for security reasons. My card was a secondary card with a limit just high enough to buy groceries, cold medicine, children's clothes, and things that would never require him to explain himself to anyone. Whenever I asked about our savings, Adrian sighed as if I had interrupted him in the middle of an important meeting. "Meredith, just take care of our son. Money is not something you need to stress about." It sounded like concern, but every time he said it, I felt myself shrink a little more. I used to understand the financial reports of entire businesses, yet inside my own family I had to ask before buying a winter coat. I used to catch discrepancies of only a few dollars in clients' books, yet I was not allowed to see a loan that carried both our names. The most painful part was not losing money. The most painful part was being convinced that I was not capable enough to understand what I was losing. And Adrian was very good at doing exactly that. Noah was the only reason I kept trying to believe that house could still become a real family. He was born on an autumn morning in Houston, when the sunlight was still soft against the hospital window. The first time I held him, I understood that some kinds of love do not need to be taught, do not need to be proven. One tiny breath against your chest is enough to make the whole world change. Noah had Adrian's dark hair, but his eyes were like mine, deep and watchful, lingering for too long before asking a question. To me, Noah was a child who needed to be loved every single day. To Adrian, he was more like a medal than a son. He liked mentioning Noah at dinner parties. He liked saying his son would one day follow him into real estate. He liked holding him for a few minutes in front of guests so people could praise him as a successful man with a perfect family. But when the guests left, when the living room lights slowly went dark, Noah always came back to me. The fevers, the teething nights, the mornings when he cried because he did not want to go to school, all of it belonged to me. Adrian missed almost every small thing that made up our son's childhood. He missed Noah's first steps because of a call with an investor. He missed his preschool performance because of a sudden business trip. He even missed the nights when Noah ran to the door holding a picture book simply because Adrian had promised to read it to him before bed. Each time I invented a gentler excuse than the truth. Daddy is busy. Daddy is working hard. Daddy loves you. He is just coming home late tonight. But children do not need many explanations. They only look at the empty chair. One evening, Noah sat by the living room window for almost 2 hours, both hands wrapped around a storybook about a little bear trying to find his way home. He was wearing blue pajamas, his hair still damp from his bath, his eyes lifting toward the street every time headlights passed in front of the house. "Mommy, did Daddy forget?" he asked, very softly. I texted Adrian. Then I called him. Then I listened to his cold voicemail answer in his place. By the time Noah fell asleep on the couch, still clutching the book tightly in his hands, I understood that some wounds do not need shouting to hurt a child deeply. Adrian came home close to midnight carrying the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume and manufactured exhaustion. When I asked whether he remembered his promise to our son, he only removed his watch and placed it on the table. "I am building a future for this family, Meredith. One day, Noah will understand." I looked at my son curled up asleep on the couch, and for the first time I no longer believed that sentence. A future without evenings beside your child was being built for whom exactly? The night I found the truth, I had not been trying to uncover any secret. Noah had a school field trip coming up, and his teacher needed a copy of his identification documents. His passport was usually kept in Adrian's office. That room was always locked. Not the kind of lock meant to protect important papers, but the kind of lock that made everyone living in the house understand. There was a part of my husband's life I was never allowed to enter. But that evening, Adrian rushed out after a short phone call. He wore a white shirt, sprayed on a stronger cologne than usual, and left the house without turning the key. When I heard his car disappear from the driveway, I stood in front of that door for a long time. I told myself I was only going in to get my son's passport. But some doors once opened do not simply lead you into a room. They pull you out of a lie you have lived inside for far too long. The passport was in the top drawer, exactly where Adrian had said it would be. I had just picked it up when my hand touched a gray folder hidden underneath. The edge of a paper showed a line of red text that made me freeze. Final notice. The bank's name was printed right above it. My heart slowed for one beat, and then the accountant's instinct I had tried to bury beneath years of family dinners suddenly came back to life. I opened the envelope. A commercial loan overdue for months. A remaining balance of more than $340,000. I read it again and again, at first thinking I must have misunderstood. But anyone who has worked with financial records long enough knows that paperwork does not lie. Only the people who sign it do. I opened the second envelope. Another bank. Another delinquent account. Then the third envelope. A debt collection company. Then more mortgage notices, penalty letters, and loans piled on top of loans like rotten bricks holding up a house about to collapse. I sat down in Adrian's leather chair, the chair he always called the place where big decisions were made. On the desk, our family photograph stood inside a silver frame. Adrian was in the middle, one hand resting on my shoulder, the other holding Noah, his smile so perfect that the longer I looked at it, the colder I felt. Beneath that photograph was an entire hollow empire. The real estate company he bragged about was drowning in debt. What made my hands shake was not the amount of money. It was my name appearing on several documents I did not remember signing. I did not cry. Maybe tears require at least a little surprise, and what I felt in that moment was deeper than surprise. I took out my phone and photographed every page, every signature, every red stamp, every date. In my mind, all the numbers began arranging themselves into an escape map. When I finished, I put everything back exactly where it had been closed. The drawer turned off the light and walked out. The hallway was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. But from that night on, I was no longer the wife locked outside his office. I was the only person who knew this house was burning from within. The next morning, I called Harper Ellis, my college roommate, and the only person who had once looked at Adrian and told me, "Meredith, something is not right about him." Back then, I had laughed it off the way women in love often do when someone touches the fragile faith they are trying so hard to protect. But this time I only said, "Harper, I need to check my credit. I need to know if there are any debts under my name that I know nothing about. Harper did not ask too many questions. She told me to come to the bank during my lunch break, bring my identification documents, and bring every copy I had. When I sat across from her in the small glass-walled office overlooking the busy street, I felt like someone waiting for the test results of my own life. Harper opened each report and pulled her chair closer to me. The more she read, the quieter her face became. There were 2 loans under my name. I stared at the screen for a long time. The electronic signature appeared at the bottom of the file, neat, clean, and close enough to mine that if I had not been myself, I might have believed it was real. But I knew I had never signed it. I knew I had never agreed to it. While I was making porridge for Noah, washing his school uniform, and cutting flowers for the table so Adrian could entertain guests, my husband had been using my name as a cushion beneath his pile of debt. "This is fraud," Harper said very softly. I folded the copies of the documents and slipped them into my handbag. "I know. Do you want to report it to the police?" I looked through the glass wall. People were still walking past, holding coffee, making phone calls, laughing, as if the world had not just cracked open under my feet. "Not yet. I need to understand the whole picture first." From that day on, I began living 2 lives. By day, I was still the gentle wife in the big house, still preparing dinner, taking Noah to school, and staying silent when Adrian spoke to me, in that condescending voice of his. But at night, when the house was asleep, I opened my old computer, saved documents, recorded dates, photographed statements, and made copies on a small hard drive hidden behind Noah's toy box. I opened a savings account at another bank. Every month, from a few freelance accounting jobs, I transferred a little money into it. Not much. Some months it was only enough to buy a pair of children's shoes. But to me, each small deposit was not just money. It was a piece of an emergency exit. If you understand what it feels like to stay silent, not because you are weak, but because you are protecting yourself, comment, "I understand." And if this story touches you, subscribe to the channel to keep hearing stories about people who were underestimated, but never truly defeated. 3 years passed like that. I learned when to smile, when to stay quiet, when to ask just little enough that Adrian would not become suspicious, and when to observe closely enough that he could not keep hiding forever. He thought I knew nothing. He thought I was still the woman who needed him to explain how the world worked. He did not know I had learned the language of numbers all over again. And this time they were on my side. A year before the trial, Adrian began changing, in ways only someone living under the same roof would notice. He came home later, but he no longer carried the exhaustion of a man who had just escaped a long meeting. He walked into the house with his shirt buttoned too carefully, his hair still smelling of fresh gel, and a strange, sweet scent lingering on his collar. At first, I did not ask. Not because it did not hurt, but because some questions only teach liars how to lie better. I watched him place his phone face down on the dining table, change the password on his computer, then step into the garage to take calls while I washed the dishes. Once I heard him laugh softly behind the door. It was not the kind of laugh he used to give me. Her name appeared before she ever stepped into my life. Sienna. Adrian mentioned that name too, naturally, too often, like a man trying to make something unusual sound like business. Sienna has a very sharp eye for the market. Sienna says the Midtown project has potential. Sienna is the kind of woman who understands professionalism. Each time he said it, he glanced at me as if he wanted me to understand on my own that I no longer belonged among the women worthy of respect. One evening, while I was folding Noah's clothes, Adrian stood in front of the mirror adjusting a new silk tie he had bought with a credit card already close to its limit. He looked at me through the mirror, his gaze sliding over my old sweater, as if it were something that had lost all value. "You should take better care of yourself, Meredith," he said. "Women today need to know how to present themselves. Sienna is always so polished." I finished folding Noah's small pajama shirt, smoothed down the sleeves, and placed it in the drawer. Something inside me stung, but it was no longer jealousy. Jealousy requires a love that still has hope. I only felt sad for a man who needed to borrow admiration from a younger woman to forget that he was sinking. Then one night, Adrian's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. A short message appeared on the screen. "See you tomorrow. Wear the blue tie. I like that color." I did not touch the phone. I did not need to. Some evidence is clear enough without being unlocked. I only dried my hands, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check whether Noah was asleep. Behind the bathroom door, Adrian was still humming an unfamiliar tune. He did not know that this marriage had already ended inside me long ago. And he certainly did not know that the woman he thought was outdated and easy to control was quietly remembering every detail. Because this time I did not need to catch him in the act. I only needed to wait for him to step into the light on his own. The first time I met Sienna Lane was not at a hotel and not outside Adrian's office. I met her inside my mother-in-law's house at Lorraine Whitmore's birthday dinner, beneath crystal lights surrounded by the smell of expensive roast meat and wine glasses that reflected every face pretending not to see the truth. I arrived early, as I always did. I helped the housekeeper arrange the plates, placed flowers in the center of the table, and reminded Noah not to run through the living room because his grandmother disliked noise. Lorraine walked past me, glanced at the pale blue dress I had worn for too many seasons, and said in a voice that was soft but sharp, "Meredith, do not make the atmosphere heavy tonight. Adrian has an important guest." The important guest walked in with Adrian at 7 that evening. Sienna wore a cream-colored dress, her blonde hair falling over her shoulders, one hand holding a handbag she probably believed was enough to make everyone admire her. Adrian placed his hand behind her back as he introduced her. It was a small gesture, but I had once been the person who received it, so I understood exactly how intimate it was. "Everyone, this is Sienna," Adrian said. "She is advising the company on a few new investment opportunities." No one asked why an investment consultant had been brought to a family dinner. No one asked why she was seated in the chair that usually belonged to me. Lorraine stepped forward and took Sienna's hand as if welcoming a long-lost daughter. "Finally, Adrian has someone who truly understands his ambition," she said, then turned to me. "Meredith, go check whether the appetizers are ready." I stood there for a few seconds. Noah gripped the hem of my dress, looked up at me and whispered, "Mommy, why is she sitting in your seat?" I looked at my son then, at the empty chair at the end of the table, where they had silently pushed me. "It is all right, sweetheart," I said. "Some seats are not worth fighting for." But saying it did not make it hurt any less. Throughout dinner, I sat beside Noah at the edge of the table listening to Sienna, laugh at Adrian's stories listening to Lorraine, praise her modern elegance listening to one uncle say that a successful man needed a woman who was on his level. No one looked at me when those words were spoken. That was how I knew they all understood. Every now and then Sienna glanced at me with pity in her eyes. She did not know the handbag in her hand was fake. She also did not know that the man bragging about million-dollar projects was using debt to hold up every lie he told. I looked at her, then at Adrian, then at Lorraine, who seemed satisfied as if she had just replaced an old object with a newer decoration. I did not stand up and cause a scene. I did not throw a glass of wine. I did not ask Adrian how he dared bring his mistress in front of his own son. I only cut Noah's meat into smaller pieces, wiped a little sauce from the corner of his mouth, and remembered every face around that table. That night, I understood one thing very clearly. They did not simply want Adrian to leave me. They wanted me to watch myself being replaced, then lower my head and accept that I had never deserved to be there. But they were wrong. I was not being replaced. I was simply leaving a table that had been rotten for a long time. 6 months before the trial, Adrian called me into the dining room after Noah had fallen asleep. There was no dinner on the table, no glass of wine, no sign of a conversation between husband and wife. There was only a thin stack of papers, his fountain pen, and a face so cold I knew this moment had been rehearsed many times in front of a mirror. I want a divorce, Adrian said. Those 5 words fell between us, neat and clean like a notice ending a contract. I had known this day would come. I had prepared for it for 3 years. And yet when I heard him say it with his own mouth, something hollow still opened inside my chest. Not because I still wanted to keep him, but because a chapter of my life had just been officially stamped as a failure. I understand, I replied. What kind of agreement do you want? Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. Perhaps he had expected tears begging the panicked Meredith. He had always imagined. When he did not see that his brows tightened almost imperceptibly before he pushed the papers toward me. I will keep the house, the 2 cars, the company, the investments, and all assets connected to Whitmore Properties. He paused as if granting me a great act of kindness. You can keep your personal belongings. And Noah. I looked at him for a long time. You are talking about your own child as if he is an item on a property list. Do not be dramatic, he said, his voice beginning to lose patience. I do not want a custody dispute. The boy would slow everything down. You are used to taking care of him, so just continue doing that. I will pay child support according to the law. The boy. Not Noah. Not our son. Just the boy. A small obstacle on the path he imagined would lead him to Siena, to new houses, new parties, and a new life, without the quiet old wife reminding him of how badly he had failed. I placed my hand on the papers, but I did not open them right away. Are you sure you want everything? Of course, Adrian said quickly. I built all of it. You never did anything except stay home. Honestly, I am already being very fair. Many other men would not let you keep the child this easily. In that moment, every last trace of pain inside me went silent. Not because he had said anything new, but because he had finally spoken the full truth about how he saw me and Noah. I was not his partner. Noah was not his flesh and blood. We were only side characters in the success story he had written for himself. All right, I said quietly. I need a few days to review it. Adrian looked at me with relief, mixed with contempt. He thought I had broken. He did not know that some people only lower their heads to hide the moment they are smiling. And for the first time in many years, I saw the trap opening its own door in front of me. I did not go to Elaine Porter right away. For the first few days, I let Adrian believe I was confused. I still made breakfast for Noah, folded laundry, answered him in short sentences, and avoided looking directly into his eyes. Adrian enjoyed the feeling of watching me shrink inside the fear he thought he had created. Harper took me to Elaine's office in Montrose. It was on the 2nd floor of a renovated old house with no cold glass walls, only the smell of aged wood sunlight falling through white curtains and neatly arranged file shelves. Elaine Porter was in her 50s with silver, threaded through her hair, a low voice and sharp eyes. She did not comfort me. She did not call me a victim either. She simply placed a blank sheet of paper on the desk and said, "Start from the beginning. Do not leave anything out, because you are ashamed. In this room, the truth matters more than comfort." So I told her. About the office that was always locked. About the debts. About the forged signatures. About Siena at my mother-in-law's dinner table. About Adrian saying Noah would slow down his life. As I opened each folder, each photograph, each statement, Elaine did not interrupt. She only took notes with a blue ink pen. When I finished, the room was so quiet, I could hear the cars passing outside. "How long have you been preparing this?" she asked. 3 years. Elaine looked up. For the first time, there was something in her eyes that resembled respect. Most people come in here carrying panic. You brought evidence. I do not want a war, I said. I only want freedom. She pulled Adrian's papers toward her. Then we will use exactly what he wants. If he demands all the assets, the agreement can state that he receives all the assets. But assets never come alone. A house has a mortgage. A company has loans. Cars have financing contracts. The person who takes them may also have to take the responsibilities attached to them. I looked at her. So if Adrian wants everything, then he takes everything, Elaine said. Not only the shiny part, the rotten part underneath too. She called it a financial responsibility assumption clause. It would be written clearly, legally, with no deception and nothing hidden. Adrian only had to read it, and he would. Elaine also added a written acknowledgement stating that he had the right to independently review all finances, and that he voluntarily declined to do so. His attorney will advise him to read carefully, she said. I know. Will he listen? I thought about the way Adrian signed papers without looking the way he waved me off. Every time I asked about money, the way he believed he was always the smartest person in every room. No, Elaine closed the file. Then we will not bring him down. We will simply place the truth on the table and let him step over it himself. Do you think Meredith should sign, or should she fight to the very end? Comment 1, if you want her to sign and turn the tables. Comment 2, if you want her to confront him right there in court. And remember to subscribe to the channel, because from here on every word in that agreement will begin turning into an alarm bell for Adrian. I left Elaine's office after dark. Outside, the headlights stretched into long lines across the street. I no longer felt cornered against a wall. I saw only a door. And on the other side of that door, Adrian was holding the key. After my meeting with Elaine, pressure began pouring down on me from every direction. Adrian emailed me almost every day, his words growing more impatient each time. He said I was trying to drag things out to get more money. He said that if I did not sign quickly, he would ask the court to consider whether I was deliberately obstructing the process. The funny thing was, every threat was written out so clearly, as if he were stamping proof onto his own arrogance without even realizing it. Sienna called me too. Her voice was so sweet it sounded fake. Meredith, I know this is awkward, but Adrian and I are preparing for a new chapter. The purchase of our new house is being delayed because of the divorce paperwork. If you could cooperate a little faster, this would be easier for everyone. I stayed silent for a few seconds, long enough for her to hear her own words again. Then I said I will consider it. Lorraine was not as sweet. She called one rainy afternoon, her voice as cold as a silver spoon placed on a dinner table. Meredith, do not embarrass yourself. Adrian built that life. You were only lucky enough to live inside it. Sign the papers, keep the child, and walk away with dignity. I looked at Noah sitting on the floor, carefully building a bridge out of wooden blocks. My son is not a consolation prize, Lorraine. She went silent for a few seconds, then gave a sharp little laugh. Tell yourself that if it helps you sleep. But the night before the trial, I did not sleep well. I sat inside my small rented apartment where the living room had only enough space for an old couch, a folding dining table, and Noah's bookshelf. There was no crystal chandelier, no perfect lawn, no locked office. And yet, for the first time in many years, I could walk from one room to another without feeling like a guest in someone else's life. Noah slept in the small bedroom beside mine, holding the stuffed elephant with worn-out ears. I stood in the doorway and watched him for a long time. Tomorrow, if everything happened according to plan, our lives would turn a page. If Adrian read carefully, if his attorney stopped him in time, if the court asked for further review, I would still have to keep fighting. I was prepared for that possibility. But somewhere inside me, I knew Adrian would not read. People often lose not because they were never warned, but because they believed the warning was not meant for them. I returned to the dining table and opened the 52-page agreement one more time. The clause was on page 47. The waiver of independent financial review was on page 49. Everything was clear. Everything was legal. Everything was waiting for one signature. I placed my hand on my grandmother's thin sapphire ring. Then I whispered into the quiet apartment, Meredith, do not forget to breathe tomorrow. On the morning of the hearing, Houston was strangely warm. The sun rose early, spilling pale light through the trees in front of the apartment complex, making everything look painfully ordinary. I woke before my alarm, made coffee, prepared breakfast for Noah, and folded his small shirt as if it were just another school day. But inside my chest, every heartbeat reminded me that nothing about this day was ordinary. Noah sat at the dining table, his hair still messy, eating toast while watching me. "Are you going to see the lawyer, Mommy?" I placed a glass of milk in front of him. "Yes. Mommy has something important to do." "Are we still having pizza tonight?" I laughed, even though my throat tightened. Sometimes children keep adults from falling apart with the smallest things. "If you finish your homework, we will have pizza." Harper came to pick Noah up at 8 o'clock. She hugged me at the door quickly and tightly, then whispered, "Whatever happens, you are not alone anymore." I nodded and bent down to kiss Noah's forehead. He wrapped his arms around my neck longer than usual, as if he could feel something I had not yet said out loud. I drove my old sedan to the courthouse. On the way, the glass buildings of downtown Houston reflected the pale blue sky. I had passed through this area so many times when I was still an accountant, when my life still had meetings, colleagues, an employee badge, and a name that was not attached to my husband's last name. Today I was passing through it to take that name back. The courthouse parking lot was already crowded. Adrian's luxury car was parked near the entrance, polished and confident, just like its owner. I looked at it for a few seconds, then turned off my engine. Inside my handbag were copies of the agreement, debt records, photographs of documents, everything Elaine had reviewed one final time. But the thing I needed most was not inside my bag. It was the calm I had paid for with 3 years of silence. Elaine was waiting for me outside the courtroom. She wore a black suit, held a leather briefcase, and showed no emotion on her face. "Ready?" she asked. "I am not sure anyone can ever be truly ready for something like this," I said. Elaine looked at me, her eyes softening almost imperceptibly. "Then just walk in. We will handle the rest 1 minute at a time." Through the small window on the door, I saw Adrian already sitting inside with his attorney. Gerald Hoffman was bent over the file, his expression more tense than I had expected. Adrian was not. He leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the table, his watch flashing under the white light. In the row behind him, Lorraine sat like a cold statue. Sienna looked down at her phone, her lips curved into a smug smile. They had come to watch me lose everything. I took a deep breath. Elaine opened the door. The hinge made a very small sound, but in my ears, it felt like the sound of a gate closing behind the past. I stepped inside. Judge Harriet Dawson entered the courtroom with a thin file in her hand. To her, this was probably just another divorce case. But to me, every click of her heels sounded like a countdown. Adrian looked over at me, the corner of his mouth, lifting. In the row behind him, Sienna raised her phone while Lorraine sat perfectly still, her eyes bright and cold with satisfaction. They had come to watch me lose everything. Judge Dawson looked down at the file. "I understand both parties have reached a property division agreement." Gerald Hoffman stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client will assume all marital assets, including the residence, the vehicles, Whitmore properties, and all related investments." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand that by signing this agreement, you are giving up your rights to those assets?" "I understand, Your Honor." "Are you being forced or threatened in any way?" "No, Your Honor." Adrian thought it was surrender. I only remembered the dark office, the red-stamped envelopes, the forged signatures, and the 3 years I had spent quietly gathering every piece of the truth. Gerald cleared his throat. "My client was advised to conduct an independent financial review, but he has chosen to waive that option." The judge looked at Adrian. "Esther Whitmore, is that correct?" Adrian stood. "That is correct, Your Honor." I understand my company better than any auditor ever could. Gerald leaned toward him. Adrian, I still think we should review it one last time. Adrian waved him off. No need. I want this finished today. Page 49 was placed in front of him. Adrian signed with a hard stroke. Then he turned to the final page of the agreement. Gerald reached out trying to hold the papers back, but Adrian had already signed before his attorney could speak. Done, he exhaled with satisfaction. Only a few seconds later, Gerald flipped back through the file. His finger stopped on page 47. His face went pale, first, then his lips, then the hand gripping the edge of the paper. Adrian, Gerald whispered. We have a problem. Adrian frowned. What problem? Judge Dawson set down her pen. Attorney Hoffman, is there something that needs clarification? Gerald stood, his voice dry. Your Honor, my client may not have fully understood. One clause. Elaine stood immediately after him. The clause is clearly written. The debt records are fully attached. Esther. Whitmore just confirmed that he voluntarily waived independent review. Adrian snatched the agreement. What clause? Gerald pointed to page 47. Adrian looked down and read. At first his face showed only irritation. Then his brows pulled together. Then every trace of color drained from his face. The receiving party of the marital assets, he muttered, shall also assume full personal responsibility for all debts, mortgages, financial obligations, and liabilities attached to those assets. He stopped. No, Adrian said. No, that sentence does not mean that. Elaine answered calmly. It means exactly what it says. Sienna shot to her feet. What debts, Adrian, you said? The company was expanding. Lorraine turned sharply toward her son. For the first time in 8 years, I saw something on her face that was not contempt for me, but fear of her own blood. Judge Dawson looked at Adrian. According to the attached records, the assets you have just assumed are tied to total financial obligations of approximately $4.7 million. By signing, you agreed to take responsibility for those obligations and release Miss Whitmore from them. She tricked me. Adrian slammed his hand on the table. Meredith knew about this. She set me up. The judge struck her gavel. Esther. Whitmore, sit down. I demand that the agreement be voided. You signed after being questioned directly. You declined financial review. This court cannot save an adult from the consequences of failing to read what he signs. Adrian turned to me. You knew from the beginning. I stood. I knew what you hid from me. I knew what you signed using my name. But today I did not force you to take it. I simply let you have exactly what you demanded. Sienna burst into tears. Lorraine picked up her handbag and stood. Adrian called Mother. She only looked at him with eyes colder than any scolding could have been. Do not, she said. Then she walked out of the courtroom. Adrian stood there, his watch still gleaming on his wrist, his suit still perfect, but all of his power had disappeared. I looked at him one last time. I won, because for the first time he had to hold the consequences of his own choices. 3 months after the hearing, I heard that the house in Willow Creek had been listed for sale. The person who told me was not Adrian but Harper. She sent me a short message on a Monday morning. Your old house is on the market. I stared at the screen for quite a while, then placed my phone beside my coffee. Strangely, I did not feel happy. I only felt something close, like the sound of a distant door shutting in a hallway that no longer belonged to me. That house had once been the place where I wiped wine stains from the wooden table, hung wreaths on the front door, rocked Noah to sleep during feverish nights, and stood silently in the kitchen while Adrian took phone calls from another woman. It sold for far less than Adrian had once bragged it was worth. After the mortgage and the second loan were deducted, he was still left with a large debt. His luxury car was towed away near dawn. An old neighbor, said Adrian, stood outside in his robe shouting about lawyers and lawsuits, but in the end he still had to watch the car leave the driveway. Whitmore Properties collapsed not long after. The commercial buildings Adrian had once used to show off were sent to auction. The investors disappeared faster than the congratulations they had once given him. Sienna left before the dust could even settle. Lorraine, the woman who had once told me I was lucky to live inside her family, never called me once. Perhaps she was too busy explaining to her friends that her son was only going through temporary difficulties. As for me, I was not busy looking back. I accepted a full-time job at a mid-sized accounting firm. On the first day I wore my new employee badge, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my small apartment and cried. Not because I was sad. Because for the first time in years, the badge carried only my name. Meredith Cole. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not Adrian's wife. Not the shadow behind a man pretending to be successful. Noah began to change too. He made new friends, joined the school soccer team, and no longer sat by the window waiting for the sound of his father's car. One evening, he lay on the living room floor drawing a small yellow house with two people holding hands beside it. I asked who the other person was. Noah looked up and smiled. It is you and me, Mommy. Our family is enough like this. Those words made me turn my face away because some moments of happiness arrive so gently and still manage to hurt. If you believe that someone who was once underestimated can still rise and build a better life than before, comment I believe. And if you want to hear more stories about delayed justice boundaries and growing stronger, subscribe to the channel before this story comes to an end. That summer, I was accepted into an evening accounting certificate program. By day, I worked. In the afternoon, I picked up Noah. At night, the two of us studied at the same table. He practiced spelling while I studied tax and auditing. Sometimes Noah asked, "Are you tired, Mommy?" I looked at the small apartment, the plant by the window, the old soft couch that sank a little in the middle, and smiled. Tired, I said. But this time I am tired because I am building my own life. Nearly 1 year after the trial, Adrian texted me on a Tuesday evening. I need to talk to you. About Noah. I stared at those words for a long time. One part of me wanted to delete the message immediately. Another part understood that boundaries do not mean keeping every door closed forever. They mean having the right to decide who is allowed to step inside. I agreed to meet Adrian at a crowded coffee shop. When he arrived, I almost did not recognize him. There were no tailored suits, no gleaming watch, no smile of a man who believed the whole world should move aside for him. He had lost weight, and his eyes looked sunken like someone who had spent too many nights awake with his mistakes. You look happy, he said. I am happy. He looked down at his hands. I am not asking you to come back. I know that is impossible. I only want to say that I have been going to therapy 6 months now, and I am starting to understand how badly I treated you and Noah. I did not answer right away. There was a time when I had dreamed of hearing those words, but when they finally came, they did not heal the past. They only confirmed that my pain had been real. I want to see Noah, Adrian said. I want to try to be a real father if you allow it. I looked at the man sitting across from me. I did not love him anymore. I did not hate him either. What remained was only the clear-mindedness of someone who had paid enough to protect her peace. I will consider it, I said. But there will be conditions. You continue therapy. You keep a stable job. You meet Noah under supervision. And you never speak badly about me in front of our son. Adrian nodded. This time he did not argue. That night after Noah had fallen asleep, I sat by the window and wrote in my small notebook. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are doors with locks, and I am the one holding the key. I did not know whether Adrian had truly changed. That was no longer my responsibility. My responsibility was raising Noah in a home that no longer echoed with waiting, building a career under my own name, and never forgetting the woman who had stayed silent for 3 years in order to save herself. I was once treated as if I had no value. But a person's worth does not disappear just because someone else fails to see it. It remains there waiting for the day we become brave enough to claim it again. The day I walked out of that courthouse, I did not only leave Adrian behind, I came back to myself.